Get on the ground right here.
Who, me?
Get on the ground. You, burgundy shirt, get on the ground. Over here. On the ground.
I got nothing.
On the ground. Get on the ground. Do you not listen? Get on the ground. Get on the ground.
Don't slap me like that.
Get on the ground.
What you
There's a
slapping
gun
my
behind
head
me.
for?
There's a gun, I believe, behind me.
I ain't got no gun, nothing.
Put your hands behind your back.
He's 58 years old, Clarence Gailard, disabled, hands in the air, and this officer jumps and drives his foot into the back of his neck, then writes a report that tells a completely different story. Today we're breaking down one of the most disturbing use of force cases out of Orangeburg and why this officer was fired and criminally charged. Stay with me, because the body cam doesn't match the police report. Welcome back to The Constitutional Lawyer, where we break down police encounters using real law, real footage, and real consequences. Today, use of force, false reporting, obstruction, and ego-driven policing. Let's get into it. July 26, 2021, Officer David Lance Dukes responds to a call outside a townhouse complex. In the parking lot, two men are standing near a white vehicle, 58-year-old Clarence Gailard and his cousin, Mario Julian. There's no active fight, no visible weapon, no one running, but as soon as the officer arrives, he draws his firearm and begins shouting, "Get on the ground! Get on the ground!" Pause here. When an officer draws a gun, the law assumes a serious threat may exist, but the video shows something critical. Mr. Gailard raises both hands above his head, clear, visible, empty. He begins lowering himself, slowly, carefully, onto his knees. He is not charging, he is not reaching, he is not resisting, he is complying. And then it happens. As Mr. Gailard is on his hands and knees, the officer forcefully uses his foot to drive him face first into the pavement. His head violently hits the concrete. Immediately, Mr. Gailard cries out that he has a head injury. He says he has prior medical problems. He says he is disabled. But the damage is already done. So now we ask the only question that matters in excessive force cases. Was this legal? To answer that, we go to the Supreme Court. The controlling case is Graham v. Connor. This case established the standard for police use of force under the Fourth Amendment. The rule is simple in wording, but powerful in application. Force must be objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Not reasonable in hindsight, not reasonable based on ego, not reasonable because an officer felt disrespected, objectively reasonable. The court identified three factors that determine whether force crosses the constitutional line. First, the severity of the crime. Second, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to officers or others. Third, whether the suspect is actively resisting or attempting to flee. Let's apply those factors right here. At the moment force was used, there was no confirmed weapon, no confirmed violent felony. The officer later claimed he thought he saw a gun, but at the time Mr. Gailard was forced into the ground, no gun was visible and no weapon was recovered from him. That weakens the first factor significantly. This is critical. Mr. Gailard's hands were raised, visible, empty. He was lowering himself slowly, carefully onto his knees. He is not charging, he is not reaching, he is not resisting, he is complying. And that all collapsed. Was he running? No. Was he fighting? No. Was he ignoring commands? The video shows him attempting to comply, getting onto his hands and knees. That is not active resistance. Under the Graham standard, when all three factors weigh against significant force, the violent force becomes constitutionally dangerous. And that's just the beginning. Because what the officer later claimed happened does not fully match what the body camera shows. And when body cam and reports don't align, that's when the legal problems multiply. After the incident, Officer Dukes gives his explanation. He claims that when Mr. Gailard was walking from behind the white vehicle, he believed he had a gun. He says he repeatedly yelled, "Drop the gun." He says Mr. Gailard had his hands in his pockets and ignored commands to show his hands. That's the officer's version. But when we slow down and carefully examine the body camera footage, something important stands out. You don't hear repeated commands to drop the gun. You don't hear commands to show me your hands. What you hear is one repeated instruction: get on the ground. And visually, Mr. Gailard's hands are visible, raised, empty. That contradiction matters, because in use of force investigations, consistency is everything. If an officer claims he feared a weapon, the video should reflect that fear: clear commands, weapon-specific warnings, heightened tactical positioning. Instead, the footage shows loud, aggressive commands, but not weapon-based commands, and that weakens the credibility of the explanation. Here's where it gets worse. One report states the officer pushed Mr. Gailard down by placing his foot on the middle of his back. Another report describes it more severely, stating the officer jumped and stomped on the back of his neck. Those are not minor wording differences. Placed a foot suggests controlled pressure. Jumped and stomped suggests explosive force. And when different officers describe the same action in dramatically different ways, investigators take notice. Even more concerning, when Officer Dukes initially explains the incident to supervisors, he does not clearly describe how forcefully he drove Mr. Gailard into the ground. Omissions in force reports can be just as serious as exaggerations, because use of force reporting is not optional, it's a legal obligation. When officers document incidents, those reports become evidence. They are used in court. They are relied upon by prosecutors, defense attorneys, internal investigators, and sometimes juries. If a report minimizes force or fails to accurately describe it, that can trigger criminal exposure. Let's expand the legal lens slightly. This incident occurred within the Fourth Circuit, and another case becomes relevant. That case is Armstrong v. Village of Pinehurst. In Armstrong, the court held that even passive resistance may justify some level of force, but the level of force must be proportional to the level of resistance. Read that again: proportional. If someone pulls their arm away, you may use joint control. If someone runs, you may pursue. But if someone is on their knees, hands visible, attempting compliance, the amount of force justified drops dramatically. Courts analyze not just whether force was used, but whether the level of force matched the threat. Here, the threat level appears low, the force level appears high. That imbalance is what creates constitutional liability. And then there's something else, something that doesn't involve physical force at all, but reveals a troubling pattern. After everything calms down, Mr. Julian asks the officer for a business card, a simple request. Officer Dukes responds, "We don't have cards." Immediately, a supervising officer corrects him, "Yes, we do." That moment is subtle, but legally significant. Why deny individual identification information? Why create friction around accountability? In some states, officers are legally required to identify themselves upon request. In South Carolina, that requirement is less clear, but department policy often fills that gap. And when an officer appears to avoid being identified after a controversial use of force, it raises red flags, not just about policy, but about intent. This ties into South Carolina law. There's a case called State v. Liss Gray that explains two common law crimes: obstruction of justice and official misconduct. Obstruction includes acts that hinder or impede the administration of justice. Official misconduct occurs when a public official fails to properly discharge duties imposed by law. Would denying a business card alone meet that standard? Probably not by itself. But combined with excessive force and conflicting reports, it becomes part of a larger pattern of avoiding accountability. And patterns matter in court. They show intent, they show state of mind, they show whether mistakes were accidental or deliberate. Here's what happened next. 2 days after this incident, Officer Dukes was terminated by the Orangeburg Department of Public Services for violating departmental use of force policy. That alone tells you something important. Police departments do not fire officers lightly, especially not within 48 hours. But it didn't stop there. On August 25, 2021, former Officer Dukes was criminally charged with first-degree assault and battery. That charge in South Carolina can carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Let that sink in. A police officer responding to a call ends up facing a felony charge for what he did on duty. That's rare, and it signals that prosecutors believed this crossed the line from policy violation into criminal conduct. Here's the bigger picture. Use of force cases often hinge on credibility. If a jury believes the officer reasonably feared his safety, force is often justified. But when body camera video contradicts an officer's explanation, credibility begins to collapse. And when credibility collapses, everything built on top of it collapses too. That includes criminal defense. That includes civil immunity defenses. That includes qualified immunity arguments. Because courts frequently defer to officers when facts are disputed. But when video resolves the dispute, the legal shield weakens. This case also highlights something deeper inside law enforcement culture. One supervising officer reportedly fist-bumped Dukes shortly after the incident, based solely on his version of events. Another supervising officer documented the incident truthfully, including the more severe description of the force used. That contrast is powerful. Accountability inside police departments often depends on whether supervisors choose loyalty or integrity. In this situation, internal documentation appears to have played a major role in the decision to terminate and charge the officer. That is significant, because without honest reporting from within, many cases like this never move forward. Let's bring it all together. Under Graham v. Connor, force must be objectively reasonable. Looking at the three factors: severity of crime, minimal; immediate threat, not apparent at the moment of force; active resistance, not visible on camera. When all three factors weigh against significant force, driving a man's head into pavement becomes extremely difficult to justify under the Fourth Amendment. And that's why this case didn't quietly disappear. It resulted in termination, it resulted in criminal prosecution, and it serves as a reminder that body cameras don't just record citizens, they record officers too. And when the camera contradicts the report, the Constitution usually wins. If you want more real breakdowns like this, where we cut through the noise and apply the law, subscribe. Drop a comment below. Do you think this was panic or pure ego? And remember, rights don't protect themselves. You have to understand them. I'll see you in the next breakdown.